Hello, my name is Peter Raymer. Today we're going to talk about how to create a D365 SSRS report in Microsoft Dynamics for Finance and Operations. SSRS stands for SQL Server Reporting Services. Microsoft defines these reports as any visualization of a structured data set. So anytime we want to display data to a screen and we want that data to be read-only and static, reports are a great option. They query data from the underlying SQL Server database. I've gotten asked to do a tutorial on this for many times, so I'm excited to finally get to share this with you. Reports are extremely complicated, so I'm going to show you a quicker version to give you what you need to be able to do it yourself, and there's a lot more to it that we can get into in future videos. So first I want to show you a couple examples. One is this open transactions report. If I go back in Finance and Operations and I search for open transactions report, I can see it's under accounts receivable, inquiries, and reports. When I click on it, I'm going to get the same kind of dialogue that I would get for a sys operations framework batch job. So very similar. I can run this report in the background. I have parameters that I can specify, but I also have the option to print this to the screen, hit OK, and when I do that, it's going to take some time to generate that report. Depending on how much data there is or how much processing there is to generate that report is going to determine how long it takes that report to build. So I already built it. You can see here what that report looks like. And I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about some of the differences between a form and a report. Right? If I bring up a form, I'll switch over to this tab around customer groups. You can see this is a form. I've got a grid with data. I can actually filter that grid. I can use personalization to insert additional columns. So there's a lot of flexibility that I have with a form. I can edit data, insert data, delete data on many of these forms, whereas a report's different. A report is very much read-only. So I can't edit or insert data, but there is some advantages within a report. I can lay out the text to be exactly where I want that text on a piece of paper if I were to print it out. I can do subtotals and some shading and add pictures and other things that I really can't do, or at least not very easily on a form. The other benefit is a report is going to print out all of the data that I tell it to. In this case, I've only got one page, but it could be printing, 250 pages or many, many more. It's going to generate all of that, and so I've got it all rendered right here where I could scroll through it. Whereas you may not know, with a form, it actually is only going to query, most of the time, the data that I see within this grid. If there's thousands of records or even more, it's only going to show and query the records that I can see on the screen. And then as I scroll, it's going to go back to the database and pull in some more information, which is great. It increases the performance of showing that data, but I don't necessarily get to see all of the data that I want to see. I'd have to filter it down if I want it to show on this form, or I'd have to keep scrolling. Whereas reports are great. It shows all of it. It shows it exactly where we want it laid out on a piece of paper. If you're printing it to a 1099 template form or something like that, you can get those to line up in those boxes. So that's some of the background on reports. I want to show you one other just to give you an example of what reports can do. If we're on the sales order, I can go to the Invoice tab. If I've already invoiced the sales order, I can click the Invoice button, and then underneath that, I can go to Document, View, Original Preview, and have it preview or show what that sales order invoice looks like. And so if I switch over to this tab, you can see here we've got addresses exactly laid out in specific spots. I've got several different areas where I'm printing information, as well as sales line information, etc. So reports can be really great for specific designs. All right, so let's get into how do we build a report. Before we kind of do that, I want to give you the overarching view of what we're going to build. Functionally, if we look at it, right, there's a menu item we click on, we get a dialog pop up, and then we generate the report. Underneath the covers, unfortunately, there's quite a few objects that we have to interact with and build within Visual Studio to show a report. And again, there's a few different ways we can build a report. I'm going to show you how to build a report using a temporary table and a data provider class, and that'll make more sense in a minute. But these are essentially all of the steps we need to create. We need to create a contract class, a data provider class, a temp table to store our data, a report, a controller class, a menu item, a menu extension to add that menu to. We need to add security to our new menu item, and then finally we're set. So this is kind of your guide of everything that we need to build. So let's get started, and I'll walk you through each one of the steps. Fortunately, many of these steps are very much the same, and you can kind of copy and paste and replace to get this created. All right, let's jump in. So if I go and open Visual Studio, we'll come right here. I want to start with creating a new project. So just as a reminder, you can go to File, New Project, select the Finance and Operations template, or search for it in here if you haven't done that recently, and then click Next. Provide a name. In this case, I called mine Tutorial SSRS Reports, and then click Create. You can then change the model to make sure that your code is in your custom model, and you do that by right-clicking, Properties, selecting the model right here. I've created a custom one called Dynamics 365 Musings. You'll probably have one named differently, and then you're okay. You probably also want to change this synchronized database to true, because we are creating a temporary table and security, which both need that to be true. All right, so the first step we can do is create a contract class. And these classes can be created in a few different order. So if you want to create it in a different order, that's great. This is just the order that I think makes sense to me, but feel free to mix this up as you please. So here we've got a contract class. Specifically, we need this attribute, this square bracket at the top that says data contract attribute. That's going to be important. Within this class, this is where we define any parameters we want to pass to our report to potentially filter the data of our report. If you don't have any parameters, then you can leave this blank. So I guess to make more sense, what report are we actually building? And so the report we're going to build for this example is one on customer groups. So here's the customer groups form. It's a pretty basic form. There's just a few columns in it, not a whole lot, but I thought it was a good simple example for us to generate a report on. So in this case, I could show all of the rows in this table called Cus Group, or in this case, I'm going to actually filter and only show the rows where this terms of payment column is set to net 30, just so you can see how a parameter would work. So if I go back to Visual Studio, I've got a field called PAIM term ID on Cus table. If we were to look, we'd find that. And so I've created a variable called PAIM term ID, and I've created this parm method for that variable. And I've added this attribute called data member attribute, PAIM term ID, and simply by doing this, the system's going to be able to create that parameter for us for free in that dialog box. So very, very cool. And you'll see that more in a second. So for now, we'll just leave that there. Again, replace this parm method and variable with whatever parameter you want for your report. All right, the next one we need to create, we really need three classes. We need a contract controller and a data provider class. I'm going to skip to the data provider, and we'll come back to the controller later. The data provider class is this one right here. It typically, as best practice, ends in the letters DP, which is short for data provider. So I've called this one Tutorials SSRS Report DP. You can create that class by right-clicking on your project, saying Add, New Item, selecting the D365 Items node, finding the class object, and typing in Tutorial SSRS Report DP. And then clicking Add. I'll skip that step just so we can focus on the code. All right, in this code, there's a few places that you need to replace. You can copy and paste the example that I've got in this article, but then you basically have to replace a few things. One is this Tutorial SSRS Report Contract. Here, you replace this text with whatever name your contract is that you named in the previous step. Next, you make sure that the class is named ends in report DP. You can then change this prefix to be whatever you want. We do need this class to extend SSRS report data provider base. That's really important. That's what makes all this work. All right, the next piece, it gets a little bit more complicated. We need a table buffer, which is a temp table to store our data. We haven't created that temp table yet, so I could have shown you that step first, but I wanted to show you this class so you understood why we'd be creating that temp table. But we're going to create a temp table and declare that table buffer here. You're going to specify that temp table here and here. And then now we get to this process report method. This process report method's job is it's going to run when we run this report. And its job is to fill our temp table with all the data that our report is going to need to show. And so this is where, again, there's a couple different ways we can create a report. We can have a report that uses a query object within the application Explorer and pulls data from that query. Or we can fill up a temp table with our data, and that's what we're doing here. And I'll explain a little bit more in a minute. So first, we're going to pull out the contract class by declaring the contract variable, setting it equal to this.parm data contract. That's going to get the contract class out of this base, and we'll cast it back as our contract class. Now we've got this class object. We can call our parm method, in this case parm payme term ID, to get out our filter. If we've got multiple parameters with multiple filters, you can call this contract class multiple times. If you don't have any filter at all, you can skip both this call and this call right here. Now we get to the main meat, if you will, of our report of gathering our data. And this is where you may spend a good amount of time. In this case, it's pretty straightforward. I'm looking at the cus group table. I'm filtering it on payme term. Again, that's that third column we have right here to only show data for what I specify. So it'd be the same thing as if I came in here and typed net 30 and hit apply. This is what we're doing. We're grabbing only those records. And then as we loop through them, I'm going to have my table buffer, or my temp table, and I'm going to fill up each column of that temp table with the data that I need, and then I'm going to insert it. So I'm basically storing all those rows into this temporary table. What's really powerful about this option is, let's say instead of a field, I wanted to grab a method off of cus group. Maybe there's some method that sums multiple numbers or goes out to a related table and grabs that information. I don't know if there is on this particular table, but there's many cases, maybe a sales order, you need to grab the totals. Well, that field is never actually stored anywhere on a table. It's always calculated. And so you can run that X++ code that's already written and use it to actually calculate a value and return it to a temp table field. This is both good and bad. It means every single record we're running some code, and that means it's going to take longer if there's a lot of records we're looping through to generate this report. It's not going to be as fast as if we're querying data all on tables and we're writing kind of direct SQL to gather that data. But very often in reports, we do need this type of thing to get the level of data or the detailed data we need. So I wanted to show you how to do it through this approach. So we looped through our table, filled it up with our temp table. All right, now if we go back to our report here, right, we've done our contract, our data provider, our temp table. Actually, now we need to create our temp table. So let's do that next. So we need to create a new temp table. You can do that again simply by right-clicking, add new item, select Dynamics 365, find the table node in here. Let's find it right there. Give it a name. In this case, right, we called ours Tutorial SSRS Report TMP. TMP is just short for temp, and you'll see Microsoft does that a lot. Then click add. I've already done that, so I'm going to just see this one here, open it up, and then we need to add fields to store each piece of information that we want. The easiest way to add those fields is to find the table that you're pulling that data from. So in this case, cuss group, I'm going to come up here and type cuss group. I'm going to find that table. And in this case, there's a bunch of fields on cuss group. I only want to show the first 4 in my report to keep it simple. So what I can do is I can actually drag this field over here. Whoops. See if it does it there. If need be, you can view designer and then put these side by side. Dragging this over here, and then you can click and drag these over. You can hold down Control if you want to make sure you're not moving the field and creating a copy. You'll notice that plus button's right there. But by doing that, I'm adding this cuss group to that table, and it's going to keep all of the same properties that I have. So specifically, what's really important is this extended data type. This extended data type tells the system, how long the field is. In this case, it's 10 characters long. I want to make sure I'm keeping that. And so then if I come over to name, it's using a different extended data type. You can see this one's 60. So you could come in here and right click and say new string, new string, new string, and add each of the fields. In this case, they're all strings, and set each of the properties by hand. But it's a lot easier if you click, hold down Control, and drag it over to this fields node. It'll make a copy of that field until you get all the ones you want over. And you can see each one of these, we've got an extended data type as well as a label set on them. All right, I'll close that one and not try to save that. So now we've got, let me move this together so it's all in one spot. We've got one temp table. This is great. The other thing that's important is when we created this table, it by default is a permanent table. So it means every time we insert records into it, those are going to be saved to the database. We actually don't want that data to be saved permanently. We want it to be just temporarily for the scope of our report. So the way we change that, and it's really important, is we come down to this table type property. After clicking this main node, right click properties, go to table type, and change this to be temp DB. It's by default set to regular. We want this to be temp DB. Now it's set up. We've got a table. We don't actually need any indexes or methods. In this case, we're okay for now. So again, we've done our contract, our data provider, our temp table. Now we get to the report and what it looks like. So let's look at that. The way we create a report is right click on our project, add new item, select Dynamics 365 items, then go to this report node right here. We can type it in. In this case, right, I'm calling mine Tutorial SSRS Report. Got it right here okay already, so I won't click add. So now let's go ahead and open this report. You can kind of tell it's a report by this icon of a report right there. can right click, open. Here I can see the few nodes that make up the report. What we need is a data set and a design. The data set is kind of like the data source on a form where it tells the report what data it's allowed to be working with. And then the design, similar to a form, is what we see in the user interface. So let's work on those two pieces next. So to add a data set, I need to right click on the data set, say new data set. It's going to add a new node. Next, we need to go to properties. And the first thing we need to do is change this data source property to be report data provider. If this is set to query, it's going to be looking for a query object where we get our data. In this case, we want to get our data from a data provider. Again, we can have a different video where I show you how to make a query report. For now, I'm going to show you how to make it using this report data provider. Next, we're going to give it a name. We'll call it cus group. So that we remember this is where the data is coming from. And then lastly, there's this query property. There's these 3 dots or an ellipses button right here. We need to come there and click on it. When we click on it, because we've selected report data provider first, it's going to show us all of the data provider classes within the application explorer. And so we can scroll down until we find the one we're looking for. So in this case, I see tutorial SSRS report DP. That's the one we want. If you don't see it, make sure after you've created your DP class that you've built your code. That should make it so Visual Studio sees it. Now, after we select that class, we can say next. It's going to ask us which fields within this data provider class do we want to pull in. We can improve performance if we don't pull in every single field, especially if we don't need them. In this case, we want to show all the fields. We don't have that many, so let's leave this all fields checkbox checked along with the fields all checked, and then we click OK. What that's going to do is essentially put in this select statement, this SQL query, select star from this data provider class right in our little query window, and we're all set. I definitely recommend, you just use that dialog to get that for you. All right, we've got our query data, and now we can start on our design. So to create a new design, right click on the designs node, click new, and then in this case we want a precision design. Again, there's lots to cover with reports. We're going to cover the precision design for this tutorial. So click precision design. It's going to create a node like right here. You can rename it if you want. I've just called mine report, though that is important that you remember it, so I recommend you call that report. We'll need that later. Then right click and select edit using designer. It's now going to open a form that looks like this. It's a little different than you would see for a form designer. This one's a report designer we'll walk through. Normally this is all blank. I've already populated this, but let me show you how we would do that again right now. So first, we need to look at a couple things on the left side of our screen. This left side, we see this new window called Report Data. This is where it's going to show our data sets that we can use to populate our report. If you don't see this report data form or you accidentally closed it, you can come up and click this View button, and then you'll see Report Data down here at the bottom. Because it's still open, it's not showing me right now, but if it were closed, you would see View Report Data, and that will reopen it back up. Okay, next piece is this toolbox right here. It's kind of hiding in the corner, this button. This, when we click on it, is going to show us all of the different report controls that we're allowed to add to our report. So if we want some plain text, or we want a table or a matrix or an image or a chart, any of those things we can add to our report by dragging on those controls. In this case, we're going to keep it really simple. Again, there's so much more to teach you about report designs, but we're going to keep it simple and use a table. So click on this table, click and drag, and drop it onto our design right here. So now we get this kind of empty table with 3 columns that won't show anything by default. From here, we need to tell the system what data we want to show. And we have to tie that data to our data sets in most scenarios. So I'm going to come over to our data set. I can expand this cust group node. We know we already set that up in the previous step. And now I can see each one of the columns that we have available to us. So I'm going to start with cust group, and I can actually click and drag, and I want to drag it right onto this data node right here, this field right there. And when I do that, the system's going to default in some really good things for us. It's going to set this row to use whatever value is in our temp table here. It's also going to set the text to be cust group up here. I could change that if I wanted. If I wanted that a lowercase g, I can edit that kind of directly in that field, but it's going to default it based on the label on this field for me. So next, I can keep doing that over and over again. I'll drag the name column into this data right there. Same thing. You can kind of see that parentheses around it means it's grabbing the data from this field, and it's not actually going to display the text name. Next, I'll grab this PAIM term, drag it into there. I get one more. Okay, now how do I get this 4th column? What we can do from here is I can actually right click on this, and I can say insert to the right. So I'll go ahead and do that. That'll add another column. I can do that as many times as I want. If I do that too much or I don't like a column that I've added, I can right click and select delete column. And now I'm back to normal. So I'll go ahead and grab my clearing period, drag that into here. I can then resize each one of these fields to make sure that they're wide enough to fit all the data that's going to show. I know the name field's a little bit longer, so maybe that needs to be especially wide here. And then I can also select the entire table by clicking this top left corner right here. This is really important because there's some things like the data set name that you may want to change or edit, and the way you can do that at the entire table level is right here. Okay, we're kind of set, but I want to explain a little bit more how these are populated and how we would need to change them if we needed to. If, say, you didn't like this, you could always delete it, add a column back, and drag it. But if you needed to make it a little bit more complex, you needed some conditional statement, you can actually right-click on this box and you can say expression. And this is what actually is going to bring up the kind of underlying code. You can think of it kind of like an Excel formula where we say equals fields, exclamation mark, cust group value. So if we needed this to be a different field, we could come in here and replace it with whatever we needed to do. I usually find it easiest to drag and drop into this field. But you'll see that there's a lot of operations in here. If we need to make all the characters lower or uppercase, or we need to check for a divide by 0 or anything like that, we can do a lot of formulas directly within here. Similarly, we can right click in this field and say, whoops, let's click here. And if I do that, and I say expression, you can see this is just no equal sign. It's not an expression directly or not a formula. It's just straight got the text cust group. If I wanted to edit that, I could do it right here and click OK, and it's going to update those values. So there's a whole lot of properties in here around it, how it looks, what the gray lines are, how thick they are, what font we're using, so many things that you can check out. I'm not going to cover all of those things right now. We've got our table, we've got our core functionality to our report, so I wanted to show that to you. So I'm going to just go and click the corner here, and I'm going to hit the delete key to delete this other one. I'm going to leave this one that I've already got in here, and then we're all set. So I've got our report, I've got our DP, our contract class. One really important step that I need to do before I will be able to run this report is I actually need to deploy this report. If you think just building the solution is going to deploy it, that's not correct, and that's an easy step to miss. So it's really important to right click on the report and then say deploy reports. This is actually going to push this report out to where SQL Server Reporting Services sees it and is able to run it. And anytime you make changes to this report, you need to again deploy this report. So simply building the report in Visual Studio won't actually get it updated. You need to deploy it if you're in a dev box. If you're promoting to it from a dev box to a tier 2 or to prod, right, that deploy step is going to happen automatically as you deploy that package. But if you're in a development environment like I am now, you need to make sure that you're clicking that deploy report anytime you've made a change to that report. All right. Cool, we're moving along, we're getting closer. I know this is a longer one. We've got contract data provider, temp table, report. We finished our report. Now we can come back and finish our controller class. So let's do that now. Controller class just looks like this. Again, you know how to add a new class. So just create a new class, name it tutorial SSRS report controller. The main thing I recommend is just leaving that report controller on the end and changing your suffix to be whatever you want. It does need to extend SRS report run controller. You do want this construct method where you tell it to instantiate this controller. So pretty easy, just replace this text with whatever you name your controller class, and then same thing in this main method. Replace this and this with whatever you name your controller class. Now there's one other important piece, right? We've got this controller parm report name where we're going to tell the system which report and which design within that report we want to run. So here we've got this built-in function SSRS report string. This is where we tell it the report object. So in our case, tutorial SSRS report. If you named yours something different, this is what you need to replace with that name. Secondly, this report right here, it needs to match whatever design you've got here. So if you called this report design or design 1 or whatever you might have named it, you do need to make sure you're coming back to our controller class. You're putting in the name of the design there. But that's it. Most of this is really just copy and replace. All right, we're in the home stretch. We need a menu item to be able to actually run and open this report. We need a menu extension so we can add the menu to it. And then lastly, we always need security. Otherwise, if we've created a new menu item and we haven't given it a security privilege or duty or role, then only our system administrators can see that. So let's go through those steps really quickly. I can right click and add new item to add that menu item specifically for a report. It's a best practice that we use an output menu item. You can see this icon kind of matches the other one. I think technically it'll work if you use a different type of menu item, but it's not best practice. So we want to come in here, type tutorial SSRS report. We can just name it the exact same as a report and click add. When we do that, it'll open up just this single node, or we can right click open, and then specifically in the properties, right? If we right click properties on this node, there's 2 properties we really need to set. Oops, 3. One is the label. So I'm going to call this one customer group report because that's the data we're showing. Next, I need to set the object type to class. This is a little confusing. In this case, since we're doing a data provider report, I don't want to just set this to SSRS report. I want to set this to class, and then I want to call this controller class right here. This controller class is what's going to kick off the generation of our data in our DP class, as well as that dialog, and then run the report and show that data. So here I've got my controller class in this property. Replace this with whatever you've specified. All right, we have our menu item. We need that 2 more things, a menu item extension and then a security. So if I clear out our application explorer on the other side, I can expand user interface. If you've never extended the menu so far, you can come to accounts receivable and say that's the one you want to add this to. You can say create extension, and it'll create a new extension object for you to add your menu item to. In my case, I've already done that, and so I want to make sure I keep adding to the same one. Otherwise you get duplicates like you see here. We don't want that. So here I can come in here and I can just say add to project. And so it'll bring that existing menu item extension into my project. So when I build, it gets included. I can right click, and now I can see here's this menu extension. All the grayed out folders are the existing base Microsoft ones. The black ones are the ones that I've customized. So in this case, I right clicked and I said new submenu, and that added this folder right here. I set the label to reports, and then you can from here, I find it easiest to drag this output menu item from our project into here, and it'll create that new node for us. It'll set the name for us. It'll set the menu item name, all that good stuff. Otherwise, I could have right clicked on this and said new menu item reference and then set those properties, but by dragging, the system's going to set those for us, which is really great. All right, so we've got the menu item, the menu extension. Now we should create security, and so to do that, you can right click, add new item, and then you can find this security privilege right here. Technically, we need at least a security privilege. That'll allow you to use a security configuration to add that menu item to a role, or you can also extend an existing role or create a new role to add that privilege to it. I definitely recommend you check out my other video on how to create security for more detailed details on that. But here we go. So we can just say tutorial SSRS report, and I can actually name it exactly the same as my report and menu item. The system lets me do that. I click add. When I do that, I can double click to open it up. Within here, I just need to add all my menu items to this entry points node. So again, the easiest way to do that is to click and drag that over to entry points. That's going to add my menu item here, set our object type, our object name automatically for us, and then we're all good. So now I need to build. That'll synchronize our temporary table. It'll synchronize the security change. It'll compile all our classes, make sure we don't have any errors. And then finally, I can come back here and actually run our report. So I'll go ahead and do that. I'm going to refresh our session. It went to sleep. And so I can actually come in here and type customer group report if I want. I can see it there. Or I can come over to the side on this menu, go to accounts receivable, and then I can actually see it down here under reports, customer group report. When I do that, I get my dialog, similar to what we saw in the examples. You'll notice I get this parameter for free because we added this parm method to our contract class. So I can filter it to any of these terms and payments that exist. I'm going to pick net 30 because I know that there's customer groups with that term of payment. I'm going to print to screen. I'm going to run it interactively and not in batch, and then I'll click OK. And then the system, in this case, ran really fast and it created a report. I can see it right here. If I want to change the layout, move things around, I can keep doing that. I can move it around in my report design, redeploy the report, and try again. Now I have all the advantages of a report. I can export to Excel or Word or PDF. I can print it. All those great things that make reports awesome and a little different than forms. So again, there is so much more to learn about reports, how you can interact with them, change the precision report to show different things. But this really gives you the start where you can show your own data, and then hopefully we can cover some of those other details in a future video. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. I really appreciate you watching. If you liked the video, click the like button. I also invite you to push the subscribe button as well. If there's other topics you would like to see a video on, please post in the comments and I'll see what I can do. I hope you learned something new today. Thank you.